London, 1822. Ivy Winslow turned too quickly. Her outstretched hand, reaching for the fan she had left on the marble console, collided with something solid, silver. She heard a muffled cry from the servant, felt the impact against her fingers, and then came the unmistakable crack of crystal. The champagne tray, polished silver, perfectly aligned glasses, tipped like a ship sinking. The golden liquid flew in a slow, inevitable arc before crashing down onto her muslin gown. Cold, soaked, unforgiving. And then silence. The kind of silence that falls over a ballroom when something terrible and irreversible has just happened. The silence before the storm of judgment. Ivy looked down. Shards of crystal scattered at her feet like fallen stars. Champagne streamed across the marble in golden rivulets. Her dress, completely ruined. The last glass rolled slowly until it stopped against the tip of her shoe. And then came the laughter. First, a stifled chuckle from Lady Pemberley. Then, the laughter of the gentleman by the fireplace. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was bending in polite hilarity, the kind of mockery disguised as courtesy that high society perfected with cruel precision. Ivy remained frozen at the center of the disaster, her fingers still suspended in the air as if she could undo it all. The heat of shame crept up her neck, setting fire to her pale cheeks, so pale that the freckles across her nose bridge stood out even more under the chandelier's light. Her chestnut hair, which refused to stay pinned even on the calmest of days, now fell in rebellious strands around her oval face. The scent of roses and candle wax mingled with the sweet aroma of spilled champagne. "Miss Winslow is always so vigorous in her movements," someone murmured behind an ivory fan. "Just like her father." A touch clumsy, more laughter, like funeral bells. The name Winslow still opened doors. Her father, the Earl of Ashmore, ensured that. But those doors creaked, held up more by tradition than respect. Everyone knew about the fortune nearly lost at the gaming tables, the disastrous investments, the mortgaged estates. Ivy's dowry was modest at best, enough to avoid total scandal, but far from enough to spark genuine interest. She was the young lady no one wanted, but no one could officially ignore. A curiously lonely position. Her eyes finally lifted, seeking the only person who mattered, her mother. Lady Margaret Winslow, Countess by marriage and martyr by choice, stood against the opposite wall, her face as pale as melted wax. Her lips formed silent words Ivy knew well. "Leave. Now." But before our heroine walks away with her head held high, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our romances and scandals. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's continue. Ivy took a step back. The sage green muslin gown, the only one not frayed at the hem, the only one she had saved for important occasions, was now soaked and ruined. Her satin shoes crushed fragments of glass beneath them. The sound was small, yet amplified by the expectant silence, like bones breaking under thin ice. Someone began to clap, a slow, mocking clap. Others joined in. She was about to crumble. Right there, before 200 people who would never let her forget that she was the daughter of the Earl who nearly lost everything. That's when she felt it. A gaze, not of mockery, not of pity, of curiosity. Ivy turned instinctively, and the air left her lungs. On the far side of the ballroom, leaning with effortless elegance against a green marble column, stood him, Tristan Aldridge, Duke of Winterbourne, the man every mother desired for her daughter, the man none could capture. His eyes, blue as deep waters, cold as a January frost, were fixed on her. But he wasn't laughing. While the entire ballroom ridiculed her, the Duke studied her as if she were a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his dark coat filled by a natural air of command. Jet black hair, a sharply cut jaw, and that expression that hovered between aristocratic boredom and something far more dangerous. There was something unsettling in that gaze, something that made the floor tilt beneath Ivy's feet. He tilted his head, a movement so subtle it might have been imagination, but it wasn't. Ivy felt the gesture like a physical touch, unexpected, intimate. impossible to ignore. And then, something inside her aligned again. Not pride, not anger. Something far more dangerous. Determination. She straightened her shoulders. Too delicate, they always said, for someone so clumsy. She ignored the laughter still echoing like crushed glass. Ignored the crystal shards bleeding golden champagne over marble. She lifted her chin, small, pointed, stubborn, and walked. She didn't run. She walked toward the double mahogany doors, every step measured, every breath controlled. Her ruined gown rustled. The freckles on her nose seemed to burn. Stray strands of hair brushed her bare shoulders. But she didn't stop. The crowd parted like heavy curtains. She didn't look back, but she knew, with absolute and inexplicable certainty, that blue eyes still followed her. The ballroom door closed behind her with a soft click. The corridor beyond was empty, lit only by silver candelabras casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ivy walked down the long hallway, then, feeling her legs give way, leaned against the cold wood, closed her eyes, and finally let the tremor course through her slender body. Seconds later, she heard footsteps. She opened her eyes at once, but the corridor was empty, or almost. At the far end of the gallery, a silhouette watched, tall, motionless, wrapped in shadow. Ivy knew that posture. Impossible not to. The Duke of Winterbourne had followed her, and for the first time in her life, Ivy Winslow, daughter of a gambler earl, possessor of a modest dowry and a sharp tongue hidden behind lovely honey-colored eyes, wondered, what happens when someone finally sees you and there's nowhere left to hide? The silence of Ivy's room was louder than the ballroom. She locked the door the moment she arrived home, ignoring her mother's muffled protests in the hallway. The candles flickered across wallpapered walls, blue flowers that had once been vibrant, now only ghosts of what they used to be. Much like this house, much like them. Ivy let her shawl fall to the floor and walked toward the wooden screen in the corner of the room. Mary, her lady's maid, a middle-aged woman with quick fingers and quiet loyalty, was already waiting, her eyes filled with worry. "Let me help you, miss." Ivy turned her back, feeling Mary's fingers unfasten the ruined gown. The sage-green muslin slid down her body like a dead skin, pooling at her feet in a damp whisper of champagne and humiliation. The cold air of the room touched her bare shoulders, and for a moment she saw the corridor again, the trembling candlelight, the silence, and the still figure at the far end. He had followed her. The Duke of Winterbourne, the man who never followed anyone, had been there, in the shadows, watching her. But he hadn't said a word, not a gesture, not a sound. Only his presence, solid and motionless, seemed to surround her with something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, pity, or something far more dangerous. Why had he followed her? Why hadn't he spoken? Mary brought a white linen nightgown. Simple, clean, comforting in its lack of pretense. Ivy put it on slowly, trying to shed the questions that refused to leave her. "Rest, miss," Mary murmured, carefully lifting the ruined dress as if it could still be saved. Both of them knew it couldn't. "Thank you, Mary. That will be all." The maid hesitated, then nodded, and left quietly. Alone, Ivy wrapped herself in a faded navy blue velvet robe and walked to the desk by the window. Her fingers trembled as she opened the secret drawer, a false bottom her father had built years ago, back when he still believed secrets could be kept in wood and locks. Inside were stacks of cream paper, ink, perfectly trimmed quills, and power. Because that was what those pages represented. Not money, though the editor paid handsomely for every word. Not fame, her name would never be printed. But power. The kind of power that turned laughter into nervous whispers. That made dukes and earls check the morning papers with sweaty hands. The kind of power a young lady without a dowry was never meant to possess. Ivy dipped the quill into the cobalt blue glass inkwell and began to write. The words flowed as they always did, sharp, precise, cruel in just the right measure. She described the ball, the gilded room, the crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like frozen tears, and then, with surgical delicacy, she began to dissect the guests. Lady Pemberley, whose laughter sounded like breaking porcelain, but whose husband preferred the company of maids to hers. Lord Kensington, the generous host, whose gambling debts were as notorious as his hypocrisy. The debutantes in pastel gowns, smiling like wax dolls, each measuring the others, calculating who would marry first, who would fall from grace. The quill scratched against the paper. Ivy smiled. They had laughed at her tonight. But by morning, when the veiled pen was published, they would be the ones mocked. And they would never know that the author was the same clumsy young lady who had spilled champagne at her own feet. The irony was delicious. She was about to sign with her pseudonym when the image returned, uninvited, unwanted, blue eyes as cold as a winter sea, the way he had looked at her, not with mockery, not with pity, but with something dangerously close to recognition. As if he knew. Impossible. No one knew. Not even her mother. Not even the editor who printed her words every week. Ivy had built this identity with the same care she built her sentences. Brick by brick, lie by lie. But that look? She shook her head, pushing away useless thoughts. The Duke of Winterbourne had no reason to think of her. He had likely forgotten her before she even left the ballroom. Men like him didn't waste attention on women like her. Ivy finished the column with a venomous reflection on the performative nature of the aristocracy. Everyone wore masks, she wrote, but some were honest about their lies. She sealed the envelope with red wax, but never with a crest. She placed it inside a second. Plain envelope addressed to Mrs. Henley, Bedford Street, number 14. Mrs. Henley didn't exist, but the little bookshop on Bedford Street did, and its owner, Mr. Dalton, a discreet middle-aged man with tired eyes and old debts to Ivy's late grandfather, never asked questions. Tomorrow morning, Mary would take the envelope during her routine errands and leave it on Mr. Dalton's counter. Mr. Dalton would tuck it into a special drawer. And on Wednesday night, when the shop closed, another man, the editor, would come through the back door to collect it. 3 layers of distance between Ivy Winslow and the veiled pen. 3 layers that kept her safe. By Thursday morning, all of London would be talking. She put everything back in the hidden drawer and locked it. Blew out the candles. Lay down on the narrow bed, still dressed, and watched the shadows dance across the ceiling. She should have felt satisfied, avenged perhaps, but all she could feel was the strange sensation that something had changed tonight. Something that couldn't be undone with ink and paper. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. London slept, unaware that the quiet, humiliated young lady held a secret capable of destroying reputations with 6 well-placed words. And somewhere in the city, in a stone mansion where the marble was warmer than the hearts inside it, a blue-eyed duke held a glass of brandy and wondered why he couldn't stop thinking about a young lady who had dropped a silver tray. Neither of them slept that night. 3 days after the disaster at the ball, Ivy needed books. Not just any books. She needed something dense, complex, something that would keep her mind too occupied to think about gray eyes and dark corridors. Her column had been published the previous morning, and London was buzzing with speculation about the identity of the veiled pen. It should have brought her satisfaction, but all she felt was restlessness. Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly was her refuge. Oak shelves from floor to ceiling, the scent of bound leather and fresh paper, the reverent silence of a place where words mattered more than titles. Mary accompanied her, as always, keeping a respectful distance while Ivy wandered through the narrow aisles. Her fingers trailed over the spines. Philosophy, poetry, history. She stopped before a volume of political essays when she felt it. That familiar sensation of being watched. Ivy turned slowly. At the end of the aisle, half lit by filtered window light and shadow, stood him, Tristan Aldridge, Duke of Winterbourne, a dark wool coat of fine tailoring, black hair slightly tousled, a stack of books tucked under one arm. He looked as out of place in a bookshop as a sword in a tea room. Dangerous, fascinating, impossible to ignore. His blue eyes met hers. Ivy should have curtsied. She should have lowered her gaze. She should have done anything other than stand there frozen, holding a book on radical political theory. But she couldn't move. He approached. Each step measured, deliberate, like a predator in no hurry, because it knew its prey had nowhere to run. "Miss Winslow." His voice was deep, cultured, with that faint touch of something indefinable. "What a pleasant coincidence." Ivy forced a polite smile. "Your Grace." She curtsied briefly. "Indeed, quite a surprise." He glanced at the book in her hands. One dark eyebrow arched, the only visible sign of emotion on his otherwise composed face. "Reflections on Modern Governance." He said the title softly. "An unusual choice for a lady." His tone wasn't mocking. It was curious. Ivy lifted her chin. "I find political discussions fascinating, Your Grace, even if society considers them improper for my sex." Something flickered in those blue eyes. Amusement? Approval? "Society considers many things improper," he replied quietly. "Often, the most interesting ones." The air between them thickened. Ivy's heart began to race. Mary cleared her throat discreetly from the end of the aisle, a gentle reminder of propriety and reputation. The Duke stepped back half a pace. Appropriate, respectful, but his eyes never left hers. "Miss Winslow, I wonder." He hesitated. For the first time, he seemed almost uncertain. "Would you allow me to accompany you, along with your companion, of course, for an ice cream at Gunter's? It's a pleasant afternoon, and it might serve as a small atonement for the embarrassment you surely felt at the Kensington ball." Ivy blinked. Gunter's tea shop was perfectly respectable, famous for its ices and for the tradition of gentlemen serving ladies waiting in their carriages. With Mary present, there would be nothing improper. And yet, a duke inviting her. Her mind raced. Her latest column had mocked half the guests from that same ball. If he suspected, "I don't believe Your Grace should feel responsible for—" "I don't feel responsible," he interrupted, gentle but firm. "I feel curious." The word lingered between them like smoke. Ivy should have refused. She should have invented an engagement, an excuse, anything. But there was something in that gaze, something that challenged her, that saw her, and she found she couldn't say no. "It would be an honor, Your Grace." 20 minutes later, Ivy sat at a small table outdoors in Berkeley Square, beneath the gentle shade of an old plane tree. Mary was a few yards away, close enough to be proper, far enough to grant them privacy. The Duke of Winterbourne returned with 2 crystal cups of ice cream, bergamot for her, coffee for himself. He sat across from her with effortless elegance, as though sharing ice cream with a modestly dowered lady were something he did every day. "Bergamot," he said, sliding the cup toward her. "Mary mentioned it was your favorite." Ivy glanced toward Mary, who quickly looked away, cheeks faintly pink. "Very observant of Your Grace," Ivy murmured, accepting the small silver spoon. "Observation is an underrated skill." He took a spoonful of his own ice cream, his eyes never leaving hers. "I noticed, for instance, that you didn't trip over the footman. You merely turned too quickly, without looking." A genuine accident. Ivy's chest tightened. Most people found it amusing. Most people are cruel when they think no one is judging them. Bitterness crept into his tone. Laughter is easy. Empathy is rare. Ivy studied him. The faint lines near his eyes. The tension in his jaw. This wasn't the distant, cold Duke everyone described. Or perhaps it was. But there was something beneath it. Something wounded. Your Grace was kind not to laugh. I wasn't kind. He set his spoon aside, leaning slightly forward. I was honest. And honesty, Miss Winslow, is even rarer than empathy. The words were casual, but the weight behind them wasn't. He was testing something, searching for something. Ivy took a spoonful of her ice cream, buying herself a moment. The citrus burst across her tongue. Fresh, sharp, perfect. And what does Your Grace observe now? She dared to ask. He smiled. Not fully, just the faintest curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. I observe a young lady who reads political philosophy, who keeps her composure under public humiliation, who chooses bergamot, a refined flavor with a hint of bitterness. He paused. And I wonder what else lies beneath the surface. The air left Ivy's lungs. He knew, somehow, impossibly, he knew there was more to her than met the eye. But how much? Perhaps, she said carefully. Some things are kept hidden for good reason, Your Grace. Undoubtedly. He returned to his ice cream, though his gaze stayed on her. The question is, are we hiding from others or from ourselves? And Ivy realized this wasn't a casual conversation about ice cream and weather. It was a chess match, and she had just discovered she was playing. The ice cream melted slowly under the afternoon sun, but neither of them seemed to notice. "Tell me, Miss Winslow," Tristan said, leaning back in his chair with studied elegance. "What draws you to political philosophy? Most young ladies prefer romantic poetry." Ivy swirled the spoon in her cup, watching the tiny ice crystals dissolve. A simple question, yet nothing about this man was simple. "Perhaps because politics shapes the real world," she answered carefully. "Poetry is beautiful, but it rarely changes laws or fates." "I disagree." He tilted his head slightly, a dark lock of hair falling across his brow. "Well-chosen words can destroy reputations more effectively than any law. Don't you agree?" Ivy's heart stumbled. The veiled pen. He was talking about her column. He had to be. "I suppose so," she murmured, forcing her gaze to remain steady. Although words used to wound say more about the writer than about the target. "Interesting." His blue eyes gleamed. "So you believe satire reveals weakness, not strength?" "I believe satire can be either a scalpel or a hammer. It depends on the hand that wields its silence." He studied her as if deciphering an ancient text. Ivy felt the weight of that gaze on every inch of her skin. Then he smiled. For real this time. Brief, but genuine. "Do you read the Morning Observer, Miss Winslow?" The newspaper that printed her column. "Occasionally," she lied. "Why do you ask?" "There is a columnist. The veiled pen. Anonymous, of course, but extraordinarily perceptive." He took a sip of water, his eyes never leaving hers. Her latest piece was particularly sharp. It described the Kensington ball with impressive detail. The world tilted. Ivy forced a light, almost bored smile. "I must have missed that edition. A pity. She has a rare talent for exposing hypocrisy." He paused. "And for seeing what others prefer to ignore." The air grew too dense, too hot. Ivy needed to change the subject before her face betrayed her. "Your Grace seems to admire this mysterious writer quite a bit." "I admire brilliant minds wherever they choose to hide." He set down his glass, long fingers tapping lightly against the table. "Though I wonder why someone with such talent would choose anonymity. Fear? Or something more complicated?" Ivy gripped her spoon too tightly. The silver felt cold against her palm. "Perhaps the author knows that certain truths can only be spoken from behind a mask, Your Grace. The world rarely forgives honest women." The words came out sharper than she intended, more revealing. Tristan went still. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. So close Ivy could count the darker specks within his irises. So close she could feel the warmth of his breath. "And you, Miss Winslow?" His voice was low, intimate, dangerous. "Do you wear masks?" Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "We all do, Your Grace. The question is, do we know we're wearing them?" For a moment, an eternal, impossible second, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, as if two people who lived in hiding had suddenly seen each other clearly. Then Mary coughed delicately. The spell broke. Tristan leaned back, the mask of aristocratic composure sliding neatly back into place. But his eyes still burned with unspoken questions. "Forgive me," he said, his tone once again calm, polite. "I didn't mean to burden you with heavy philosophy on such a pleasant afternoon." "You didn't burden me." It was true. He terrified her, fascinated her, challenged her, but he hadn't burdened her. He signaled to the waiter, who brought the bill on a silver tray. Coins changed hands with quiet efficiency, privilege disguised as effortless courtesy. "Miss Winslow," Tristan said as he rose, extending a hand to help her up. May I be bold enough to ask if you would accept my company again? There's an art exhibition at Somerset House next week. I've heard some of the pieces are provocative. Ivy placed her hand in his. Even through her gloves, she felt the heat. Provocative? Art that defies convention. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I thought you might appreciate it. She should refuse. Every instinct screamed danger. But there was something in that invitation. A challenge, a recognition, a promise of something she couldn't yet name. With Mary present, of course. Of course, he echoed. But his eyes said, I know how to play this game too. Ivy nodded to Mary, who approached with quiet precision. As they walked away, she felt the Duke's gaze burning into her back. She didn't turn around, but she knew, with terrifying certainty, that something had shifted at that table beneath the plane tree. He was hunting, and she was the prey. The question was, what would happen when he finally caught her? That night, alone in her room, Ivy opened the secret drawer and stared at the stacks of cream paper. Her words, her power, her secret. For the first time, she felt fear. Not of the Duke discovering her, but of wanting him to. The exhibition at Somerset House was a study in contradictions. Light filtered through tall windows, bathing canvases that defied every convention society held sacred. Naked women were painted not as ethereal muses, but as beings of flesh and desire. Battle scenes showed real blood, not sanitized glory, art that refused to lie. Ivy stopped in front of a particularly controversial painting, a woman holding a mask, her real face turned toward the observer, vulnerable and defiant at once. Truth revealed, a deep voice murmured beside her. She didn't startle. She already recognized his presence before even seeing him, as if the air itself changed texture whenever Tristan Aldridge was near. Is that the title or an observation, Your Grace? Both. He positioned himself beside her, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the painting. Though I wonder if truth revealed is still truth, or merely another form of performance. Ivy looked at him. His aristocratic profile was outlined against the light. Sharp jaw, straight nose, those lines of tension around the eyes that never fully disappeared. Quite heavy philosophy for a Saturday morning. Would you prefer lighter conversation? He turned his head, blue eyes meeting hers. About the weather, perhaps? Or society scandals? I prefer honesty. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Even when it hurts. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Pain? It vanished too quickly to tell. Honesty is a rare currency, Miss Winslow. Most prefer the comfort of well-told lies. Most, she echoed, have never learned that lies cost more in the long run. He went still, studying her with that unsettling intensity that made her stomach tighten. Speaking from experience? Yes, every column she wrote was a lie wrapped in truth. Every timid smile she gave in ballrooms was a mask upon a mask. Speaking from observation, she lied softly. Mary stood at a polite distance, pretending to be interested in a seascape. But even she could not ignore the electric current that ran through the air between Ivy and the Duke. Tristan took a step closer, not enough to be improper, but enough for Ivy to feel the warmth radiating from his body. Miss Winslow, I need to make you a proposal. Her heart skipped. Your Grace. Nothing scandalous, I promise. A faint smile touched his lips. Though perhaps unconventional. Ivy waited, barely breathing. I would like to propose that we become friends. Of all the things she might have expected, that was not one of them. Friends? Yes, friends who may meet publicly, in respectable places, always with a proper chaperone. He gestured vaguely toward Mary. Friends who can speak of art, literature, philosophy, without the suffocating expectations that usually accompany interactions between men and women of our rank. Ivy blinked. Your Grace is suggesting that your company shields me from ambitious debutantes and their even more ambitious mothers, and my company grants you access to places and conversations a lady of modest means seldom experiences. He paused. A mutually beneficial arrangement. No promises, no expectations of courtship. It should have sounded cold, calculated. But the way he looked at her, with that mix of hope and carefully hidden vulnerability, suggested something else entirely. He was lonely, and he recognized loneliness in her too. "Why me?" Ivy asked quietly. "Why not some elegant widow or fashionable lady?" "Because they all want something from me. You." He hesitated. "You look at me as though I were simply human. Not a title, not a fortune. Just me." Ivy's heart ached, because she understood that far too well, being seen only as a social failure. A modest dowry, the daughter of an earl who lost everything at the card table. Never as Ivy. Simply Ivy. "And if," she said carefully, "you were to discover I'm not who you think I am?" Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Then I'd have the privilege of knowing who you truly are." The air grew heavy, charged. Ivy felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling forever. She should refuse. Invent an excuse. Leave before this became more complicated than it already was. But when she opened her mouth, she heard herself say, "Very well, Your Grace. Friends." The smile he gave her transformed his entire face. It wasn't broad, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Perhaps the first genuine thing she'd ever seen in him. And it was terrifying how much she wanted to see it again. "Tristan," he said suddenly. "Pardon?" "When we are among friends." His voice lowered. "You may call me Tristan." The name sounded too intimate, too dangerous, like crossing an invisible line that could never be uncrossed. "Only when we are completely alone would that be proper, Your Tristan." He nodded, but his eyes gleamed with what might have been satisfaction. They continued through the exhibition, speaking of brushstrokes and perspective, of artists who chose truth over beauty. And with every painting, every exchange, Ivy felt the walls between them crumble, stone by stone. When they stopped before one last canvas, a portrait of a woman, writing by candlelight, her face partially hidden in shadow, Tristan stood motionless. "Fascinating," he murmured, "how the light captures only fragments." As if the artist knew that some secrets must remain hidden to stay true. Ivy looked at the woman in the painting, the quill in her hand, the way the shadows both protected and revealed her. "Perhaps," she said softly, "the artist understands that some people can only be honest when no one knows their name." He turned to her, slowly, deliberately. "And would that," he asked in a rough voice, "be freeing or lonely?" Ivy met his gaze, gray as a storm, as iron, as truth, both. For a moment, one suspended crystalline second, she saw everything in him, the guarded pain, the loneliness of power, the weight of being forever watched, forever judged, never truly known. And he saw her too. She knew it because something in his expression shifted, softened. "Ivy," he said, just her name. But the way he said it, gentle, careful, as if it were something precious, made her heart stop. Mary cleared her throat. The world returned. People moving, distant voices, the scent of paint and varnish. Tristan stepped back the proper distance and offered his arm formally. "Allow me to escort you to your carriage." Ivy placed her hand on his arm. She felt the solid muscle beneath the fine fabric, the warmth of him seeping through layers of silk and glove. They walked in silence through the marble halls. Mary followed behind. The whole world seemed to be watching, but all Ivy could feel was his hand brushing hers for a brief second, just one, before helping her into the rented carriage. "Until soon," he said. It wasn't a question. "Until soon," she echoed. The carriage pulled away. Ivy looked through the window and saw Tristan standing at the entrance of Somerset House, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had just made the most dangerous bargain of her life. Because friendship was not what she had felt when he touched her hand. And friendship was certainly not what she saw in his eyes when he looked at her as though trying to memorize every detail. It was something far more dangerous, something with no safe name, something that could destroy them both. Tristan Aldridge did not believe in coincidences. Seated in his private library, a refuge of dark mahogany and heavy silence, he held two seemingly unrelated objects. In his left hand, the latest issue of the Morning Observer, folded open to the veiled pen. In his right, the program from the Somerset House exhibition, still carrying the faint trace of bergamot Ivy Winslow had left in the air. A coincidence that both smelled of inconvenient truths? Unlikely. He set the paper on the desk and lifted his glass of brandy. The amber liquid caught the firelight, turning to molten gold, just like Ivy's eyes when the light touched them at a certain angle. Honeyed, secret, impossible to fully read. Perhaps the artist understands that some people can only be honest when no one knows their names. Her words echoed, spoken with such conviction, such personal experience. He needed to know that woman better. In truth, he longed to. And perhaps that was why, in a moment of uncharacteristic impulse, he'd asked her to be his friend, though in his heart, the word friend felt far too small for what he already wanted. Tristan took a slow sip. The brandy burned, but not as sharply as the suspicion winding through his mind like poisonous ivy. Ivy Winslow. Discreet young lady. Awkward. Practically invisible in London society. But her eyes saw everything. Observed, calculated, judged. Exactly like the veiled pen. Why did both women fascinate him so? Yes, he was certain the veiled pen was a woman. Of that he had no doubt. He unfolded the newspaper again, rereading the column he had memorized 3 readings ago. We witness the theater of the aristocracy, where all perform roles written by convention. The debutante smiles though she trembles. The gentleman woos though he is bored. And we, the complicit audience, applaud the lies because the truth would be far too indecent to speak aloud. Perceptive, cruel in just the right measure, and absolutely precise. Whoever wrote those words knew high society from the inside, not as a bystander, but as a prisoner. Someone who played the part while secretly despising the play. Someone like himself, or like a modestly dowered lady, daughter of a disgraced earl, who smiled through ridicule because she had no choice. Tristan closed his eyes. Helena would never have written such words. Helena had been everything society expected. Beautiful, gentle, perfectly proper. A porcelain doll who never questioned her role. He had intended to marry her not out of love, but because it was appropriate. Because that was what dukes did. And then she had died. Frail health, fever, swift and merciless, 3 weeks before the wedding. Everyone expected him to collapse in grief. But the truth he had never confessed to a single soul, was that what he felt most was guilt. Because he hadn't loved her. Because he had planned a lifetime of polite lies and empty duties. Because deep down, he had felt relief when she was gone. What kind of man feels relief at his fiancée's death? A monster or a coward? Probably both. He opened his eyes, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. 3 years since Helena's death. 3 years of refusing every social invitation, every transparent attempt, every mother thrusting daughters in his path. Until that night at the Kensington ball. Until he saw a certain young lady drop a silver tray to the floor while an entire ballroom laughed, except him. Because there had been something in her eyes, in that brief second before she gathered herself, that he recognized. Humiliation, yes, but also fury, wounded pride, and the raw will to survive. He had seen that look before, in his own mirror, when his father called him weak, when the man sneered that he was a disgrace to the Aldridge name for crying as a horse was being put down. Tristan had been 8. The former duke had dragged him from the stable by the hair and locked him in his room. Aldridges do not show weakness. Learn that, or you are not my son, Tristan had learned. He'd learned to bury every emotion beneath marble and silence. He'd learned that feeling was dangerous. that compassion was an open wound others would exploit. He had survived by becoming exactly what his father demanded: cold, controlled, impenetrable. But the boy who cried for the dying horse had never truly died. He had only hidden, deeply, quietly, where no one could find him and hurt him again. Until he saw in Ivy Winslow's eyes something achingly familiar. Another soul who had learned to hide in order to endure. Tristan rose and crossed to the window. London stretched below, a tapestry of light and shadow, of secrets politely concealed behind stone facades. Somewhere out there, the veiled pen was writing, watching, judging. And somewhere out there, Ivy Winslow was sleeping. Or perhaps not. Perhaps like him, she lay awake, replaying conversations laced with subtext and glances that lingered too long. "And if you discover I'm not who you think I am?" She had asked him that today, real fear flickering in her amber eyes. Fear of what? Of being found out? Or of being known? He closed his tired eyes. Lines of strain marked his face. The mask he had worn so long, he had forgotten what lay beneath it. "Then I'll have the privilege of discovering who you truly are." His own words came back to haunt him, because the truth was more complicated. He didn't just want to know Ivy Winslow. He wanted her to be the veiled pen. He wanted the quiet, underestimated woman who had caught his interest to possess a mind as sharp as a blade and a courage society would never forgive. He wanted her to be extraordinary, because if Ivy Winslow could wear masks and survive and secretly challenge a world that mocked her, then perhaps he wasn't as alone as he believed. Perhaps someone else in this city understood what it meant to live trapped between who you are and who you're expected to be. A soft knock at the door. "Come in," Tristan said without turning. His butler, Garrett, a middle-aged man of impeccable loyalty and absolute discretion, entered with an envelope. "This just arrived for your grace." Tristan took the envelope. Heavy, sealed with black wax. 3 days ago, in a moment of impulse he still couldn't fully explain, he had hired someone to discreetly investigate Ivy Winslow. Her habits, her movements, her secrets. Now he held the answers in his hands. And for the first time in 3 years, Tristan Aldridge felt fear. Because if he opened that envelope and discovered he was wrong, that Ivy was exactly who she appeared to be, nothing more, then he would lose the illusion that had kept him alive. The hope of a real connection. But if he was right? If he was right, then he was holding a secret that could destroy a woman who had begun to matter more than she should. He looked at Garrett. "Thank you." "That will be all." Garrett bowed and left silently. Tristan remained alone with the envelope and his choice. Opening it meant knowing. Knowing meant power. Power meant responsibility. And responsibility meant deciding what to do with the truth. He thought of amber eyes, of conversations about masks and honesty, of how Ivy looked at him, not as a duke, but as a man. He thought of the veiled pen writing words he'd read 3, 4, 5 times, because finally, someone was saying aloud what he had felt in silence. And then he made his decision. Tristan walked to the fireplace, held the envelope above the flames, watched the edges curl, the wax melt, the paper turn to ash before the words inside could ever be read. If Ivy Winslow kept secrets, she had her reasons. And he, more than anyone, understood the right to keep them. He would wait for her truth in her own time. When the envelope was nothing but smoke and ash, Tristan returned to his chair, picked up the Morning Observer, read again the lines he already knew by heart. And for the first time since Helena, he wanted to risk it, to truly see where this might lead. Outside, London slept, but 2 hearts remained awake, divided by miles of stone. One writing words no one could know were hers, the other burning evidence he could never unknow. And between them, truth grew like ivy, beautiful, suffocating, and inevitable. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since Ivy Winslow had become the friend of the Duke of Winterbourne, and London didn't know what to make of it. They were seen at art galleries, at the Royal Opera House, Ivy and Mary in the ducal box, A minor scandal that had the city whispering for days. Strolling through the gardens of Kew, always with Mary at the proper distance, always perfectly respectable, always dangerously close to something that wasn't friendship. Ivy couldn't understand why that man fascinated her so deeply, why her heart raced whenever she saw him, why she dreamed of those sea-colored eyes even when she wasn't asleep, and especially when she reread her own columns. She wondered what he would think if he knew they were hers. The thought terrified her. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed. They were at Hatchard's again, the place where it had all begun, though neither would admit they returned there deliberately. Tristan was leafing through a volume of German philosophy, while Ivy pretended to be interested in romantic poetry. "This is dreadful," she muttered, closing the book a little too sharply. Tristan looked up, amusement flickering across his face. "You have strong opinions about poor Lord Byron?" "I have strong opinions about men who write about passion as if it were a terminal illness." Ivy replaced the book on the shelf. "All this, she walks in beauty, like the night. It's lovely, but hollow. As if women existed only as beautiful surfaces, with no depth beneath. And what would you write?" The question sounded casual, but his eyes were sharp, attentive. "If you could write about passion?" Ivy's heart stumbled. She glanced around. The bookshop was quiet, only a few distant patrons. Mary examined maps on the far side. "I'd write about how passion is terrifying, how it's wanting something that could destroy you, how it's being near someone and feeling like you're coming undone and being remade at the same time." Silence. When she finally dared to look at Tristan, she found him utterly still, watching her as if she had just confessed something vast and irreversible. "That," he said, his voice rough, "would be far too honest for poetry. Perhaps honesty is underrated in literature, or too dangerous to admit." They were closer now. Ivy didn't know how it had happened, only that she could see the darker flecks in his irises, feel his warmth, count the breaths between them. Tristan. His name slipped from her lips like a whisper. Something crossed his face. Pain, desire, conflict. He lifted his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and his fingers brushed the inside of her wrist. Just that, skin to skin, where the glove ended. Fire. Ivy felt it race through her arm, across her shoulder, straight to her heart. "Ivy." His voice was raw, fractured. "I need to tell you something." The world stopped. "I can't." He closed his eyes, then opened them again, stripped of pretense. "I can't pretend this is just friendship anymore." The air vanished from her lungs. "Every time I see you, every time we speak, He drew a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you. And I don't know how to stop." The words were impossible. Beautiful. Terrifying. Because Ivy wanted to say the same thing, but she couldn't. Because he was falling in love with a lie. With Ivy Winslow, the shy, clumsy young lady. Not with the woman who wrote words sharp enough to wound dukes. Not with the veiled pen, whom he admired without realizing she stood before him. "Tristan, Her voice failed. "You don't need to say anything." He stepped back, the spot on her wrist suddenly cold where his fingers had been. "I shouldn't have. Forgive me. I was improper." "No." The word came firm. "You weren't improper. You were honest." He studied her, waiting, and Ivy made the most selfish, dangerous decision of her life. "I have feelings for you too," she whispered. "Even if I can't imagine why you'd be interested in someone like me." His expression changed. Relief, joy, hope all at once. "You're one of the most intelligent women I've ever met." He took her hand, properly, over the glove, but the way his fingers interlaced with hers was anything but proper. It was intimate, promising, real. "So what do we do?" he asked softly. "I don't know. The truth. But maybe we can find out together?" A small smile touched his lips. Genuine, transformative. "Together," he echoed. Mary cleared her throat 3 shelves away, a gentle reminder about time and propriety. Tristan released her hand reluctantly, but his eyes never left her. May I see you Thursday? There's a concert at Hanover Square Rooms. Mozart. I adore Mozart. She smiled, unable to help it. I know. Mary mentioned, of course she had. Mary, who saw everything with tired eyes and never judged. Mary, who kept secrets as faithfully as Ivy did. They parted as they always did, he helping her into the carriage, waving as it rolled away. Everything perfectly respectable, but everything had changed. That night, Ivy sat at her desk, her quill trembling in her fingers. She had to write her column. The deadline was morning. London awaited the veiled pen. But all she could think about were blue eyes and whispered confessions among shelves of books. I'm falling in love with you. The words echoed. Beautiful. Impossible. Because he was falling for half of her, the part she showed, not the part she hid. And when he found out, not if, but when. What then? Ivy dipped the quill into ink, began to write, but the words that flowed weren't her usual sharp satire. They were about masks, about necessary lies, about how sometimes we hide who we are not out of cowardice, but because the world punishes honest women with cruelty. They were dangerously revealing. She stopped, reread. She should rewrite something safer, but she couldn't. Because for the first time, the veiled pen wasn't writing about others. She was writing about herself. Ivy sealed the envelope, set it aside for Mary to deliver in the morning. And she knew, with terrifying certainty, that she was building her own ruin, word by word. But she couldn't stop, because Tristan Aldridge had done something no one ever had before. He saw her, truly saw her, and she longed desperately to be seen, even if it meant her eventual destruction. The Thursday edition of the Morning Observer sold twice the usual number of copies. Ivy knew because Mary returned from the market wide-eyed and carrying 2 newspapers. "Miss," she whispered, closing the bedroom door. "The entire city is talking about it." Ivy took the paper with trembling hands. There it was, her column, her words, barer, more honest than she had ever dared to be. Let us consider the woman who wears masks, not out of vanity or deceit, but out of necessity. She smiles when they want her to smile, falls silent when they expect silence. She becomes small, invisible, harmless, and everyone believes they know her. But no one asks, who is she when the masks fall? Who is she in the quiet hours when no one is watching? Perhaps she is someone extraordinary. Perhaps she is someone they would fear if they truly knew her. It went on for 3 paragraphs, each more revealing than the last. It ended with a line that now terrified her. And perhaps the greatest fear is not being discovered, but being loved for the mask and rejected for the truth. "What have I done?" Ivy whispered. "You wrote something true," Mary said gently. "And the truth always frightens." She spent the entire afternoon thinking about her latest column and how impulsive she had been. She ought to be more careful, or she would end up revealing who she was. Ivy was with Mary finishing her hair when a knock at the door made them both jump. "Ivy," her mother's voice. "His Grace is here." For the concert, Ivy's heart stopped. Tristan. He was here. He had likely already read that day's column. "One moment, Mother." Ivy looked in the mirror. A moss-green silk gown, simple but lovely. Her hair pinned up more successfully than usual. She looked calm, but her hands were shaking. "Courage," Mary murmured, adjusting her shawl. Ivy went down the stairs as if walking to the gallows. Tristan waited in the drawing room, speaking politely with Lady Margaret. When Ivy entered, he turned, and the world tilted. Because there was something in his eyes, something new, intense, as if he were seeing her through layers of glass that had finally cleared. "Miss Winslow." He bowed, formal. But when his eyes met hers, there was warmth there, and questions. So many questions. "Your Grace." Her curtsy was perfect. Years of practice made lies graceful. He offered his arm. She accepted. And when her fingers touched the fabric of his coat, she felt him shiver. Her mother would not accompany them. She complained of a headache and chose to rest. But Mary was there, a silent, protective shadow. The ducal carriage was quiet luxury, burgundy velvet, gilt trim, windows so clear London looked like a painting. Ivy sat on one side, Tristan on the other, Mary beside Ivy, everything proper. But the tension in the air was anything but proper. "Did you read it?" Tristan asked suddenly. Ivy feigned confusion. "Read?" "The Morning Observer. Today's column. The Veiled Pen." His eyes did not blink. They studied, searched. It was extraordinary. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "I didn't have the chance this morning." A lie, but a necessary one. He drew a folded copy from his inner pocket and held it out. "Read it." Please, it was not a request. It was a test. Ivy took the paper, forced herself to read her own words as if for the first time. Each line a disguised confession. Each paragraph a piece of soul laid bare. When she finished, her hands were ice. "It's intense," she managed. "It's honest." Tristan leaned forward, so close that his knees nearly touched hers. For the first time, the Veiled Pen isn't writing about society. She's writing about herself. Ivy couldn't breathe. "You think so?" "I'm certain." His voice lowered. "And I wonder, who is she? This woman who lives in hiding? This woman who fears being loved for the mask?" His eyes burned into hers, blue like a calm sea, defiant like a storm. And Ivy knew, he knew. Perhaps not with certainty, perhaps without proof. But he suspected, and he was giving her a chance to confess. "Tristan." His name broke on her lips. The carriage stopped. Hanover Square rooms. Salvation and condemnation. The moment passed. Tristan drew back. The mask of courtesy slid into place. But something in his eyes remained. Disappointment? Understanding? Patience? He helped her down, offered his arm. They walked through the candlelit entrance where London's elite gathered to worship Mozart. The concert was torturous beauty. Ivy sat in the ducal box with Tristan at her side, a feast for whispers and gossip. But Ivy was already growing used to society's murmurs. Mary was discreet at the back. The orchestra began. Violins wept. Cellos moaned. Mozart turned pain into sound. And Tristan did not look at the stage. He looked at her. Ivy felt each glance like a physical touch, felt his warmth radiating, felt the 10 centimeters between their hands on the box rail like an impossible chasm. During the crescendo, violins climbing, climbing, climbing until they broke. His hand moved, just a centimeter, then 2, until his little finger touched hers. Ivy stopped breathing. He didn't move further, only that minimal touch, innocent to any observer. But Ivy felt as if she were burning alive. The music exploded, beautiful, desperate, impossible, like them. When it ended, thunderous applause erupted. But Ivy could barely hear it over the blood pounding in her ears. "Ivy," Tristan whispered, voice rough. "Look at me." She obeyed. What she saw in his eyes shattered her completely. Love, not suspicion, not calculation. Love, pure, terrifying, unconditional. "It doesn't matter," he said softly. Words meant only for her. "What you hide, who you are when no one sees. It doesn't matter, Tristan, because I love you. The real woman, who you are." Tears burned her eyes, because he thought he knew. He thought he loved her truth, but he did not know the extent of the lie. He didn't know that the woman he admired in print and the woman at his side were the same. And when he found out, "It doesn't matter," he repeated, with such certainty that Ivy's heart broke. Because it did matter. It mattered terribly. The music began again, the second movement, slow and melancholy. Violins cried in harmony, and Ivy felt each note like an accusation. She was lying to him, in this very moment, while he declared love, while he touched her hand as if it were a sacred promise. "I am her," Ivy wanted to scream. "I am the Veiled Pen. I am the woman you admire. I am the mind you respect. I am here. I have always been here." But the words stuck in her throat. Because what if he didn't love her after? What if his love was for the shy young lady, not the razor-edged writer? What if the truth destroyed everything? The music swelled. Beautiful. Unbearable. "Ivy?" Tristan whispered, noticing something in her face. "What is it?" "Everything. Nothing. The impossible distance between who she was and who he thought she was. Her voice failed. The air was too dense, too hot, the walls of the box closing in. I need air." She rose abruptly. Too fast. The chair scraped. "Ivy, wait." But she was already moving. Mary stood at once and followed. Ivy slipped through the curtain of the box and into the corridor lined with red velvet. Her steps echoed, quick, desperate. She found a side door leading to a small terrace, narrow stone space, night air like a blade. London stretched below in trembling lights. Her hands gripped the balustrade. Cold, solid, real. Mary stopped behind her, at a respectful distance. She didn't ask. She simply waited. "I can't do this anymore," Ivy whispered into the night. "I can't keep lying to him." "Then don't lie, miss. If I tell the truth, I'll lose him." "Perhaps." Mary stepped closer, her voice kind. "Or perhaps he'll love you precisely because you are who you really are." All the parts. Even the frightening ones. Ivy closed her eyes. Hot tears slid over her cold cheeks. Inside, the music continued. Mozart turning pain into beauty. And Ivy knew she had reached the point of no return. She had to choose the safety of the lie or the devastating risk of the truth. And for the first time, she didn't know which would be more destructive. The Countess of Whitmore's ball was the event of the season. All the important names of London were there. Crystal chandeliers hanging like captured stars, musicians playing Strauss with mechanical perfection, the air heavy with the scent of roses, champagne, and ambition. Ivy wore her best dress, a lavender silk gown that Mary had managed to renew with new ribbons. It wasn't magnificent, but it was dignified. And tonight, she needed every ounce of dignity she could summon. Because Tristan would be there. They hadn't spoken in 4 days. Not since the concert. Not since she'd fled to the terrace, unable to bear the weight of her own lies. The carriage ride home afterward had been silent, like mourning. But that morning, a note had arrived, his handwriting, firm and familiar. "I'll be at the Whitmore ball tonight. I need to see you. There's something I must tell you." Hope and terror warred in her chest. Upon arriving at the ball, Ivy's mother quickly drifted away to speak with Lady Helen Westcott, leaving her alone with Mary. She was politely conversing with a few young ladies when Ivy suddenly felt a pair of eyes on her. Something was wrong. "Miss Winslow," a smooth voice behind her. "What a pleasure to see you here." Ivy turned. Lord Bartholomew Crane, Viscount of Ashby, a man in his 40s, handsome in a calculated way, known for his sudden fortune and questionable origins. No one knew exactly how he'd become rich, only that it happened quickly and involved dubious investments. The veiled pen had exposed him 3 months earlier, his too rapid wealth, his mistreatment of servants, and his conveniently widowed marriage to a wealthy heiress. The column had been devastating, precise, irrefutable, and now he was smiling at her like a snake. "Lord Crane." Ivy gave the barest curtsy. "Good evening." "An extraordinary evening indeed." His gray, cold eyes studied her. "Tell me, Miss Winslow, do you read the Morning Observer?" Ivy's heart tripped. "Occasionally. Fascinating publication, especially the veiled pen. So insightful." He stepped closer, just one step, but invasive. "Though I wonder about the author. So critical of society, so quick to judge, and yet anonymous. Almost cowardly, wouldn't you say?" "I think anonymity can be necessary," Ivy said carefully. "When one speaks truths, the powerful prefer to hide." "Truths?" He laughed, the sound cold. "Or hypocrisies disguised as moral justice?" "I beg your pardon?" "Well," he leaned in, voice dropping. "It would be dreadful to discover that the veiled pen was someone who lives in the very society she despises. Someone who attends these same balls. smiles at the same faces she ridicules in print, a deliberate pause. Someone who perhaps even seeks to marry a duke, the ultimate access to the power she pretends to scorn. The blood in Ivy's veins froze. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. "I don't know what you're talking about, Lord Crane." "Don't you?" He pulled something from his pocket. A cream envelope, familiar seal. "Because I have something rather interesting here. Private correspondence between a certain young lady and a certain editor. Obtained from a reliable source, Mr. Dalton." He had bribed Mr. Dalton. "There's nothing." "Oh, but there is." His eyes gleamed with poisonous triumph. "And I wonder what would happen if, say, during tonight's dinner, I shared this discovery with our gathered society. The revelation that the woman who judges us so harshly is a penniless young lady. That she writes for money. That she uses our trust as material." He leaned closer. "That she seduces dukes while secretly mocking everything they stand for." "That's not true." "It doesn't matter what's true, Miss Winslow." He smiled. "Only what they'll believe. And society always believes the worst of ambitious women." Ivy couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in. Faces around them turned, curious, sensing drama. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do this?" "Because you destroyed me." All pretense of civility vanished. "Your column ruined me, made my name a joke. So now," he held up the envelope like a weapon, "I'll ruin you." "Lord Crane." The voice cut through the air like a blade of ice. "Tristan." He emerged from the crowd like a storm made flesh. Black coat, blue eyes blazing. A presence that made people instinctively step back. He positioned himself between Ivy and Crane. Protective, possessive, dangerous. "Your Grace." Crane stepped back half a pace but kept his smile. "How convenient. I was just speaking with Miss Winslow about nothing that concerns me." Tristan's voice was low, deadly. "And I strongly suggest you step away. Now." "Oh, but it should concern you, Your Grace." Crane lifted the envelope. "Because it concerns the reputation of a certain lady. And a man of your position would surely want to know." "I don't want to know." The words came simple, final. Tristan raised his voice just enough to carry across the ballroom, firm, clear, impossible to ignore. "Miss Winslow has my highest esteem, my respect, and my protection. Anyone who attempts to tarnish her reputation," his gaze locked on Crane, "will answer directly to me." The air cracked. Conversations died mid-sentence. Violin bows froze. Couples halted mid-waltz. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint clink of a glass somewhere far away. Crane smiled, venom under polish, lifted the cream envelope like a trophy. "I have proof, Your Grace. When I reveal it, it will ignite like gunpowder. Everyone will know." Tristan snatched it from his hand so fast Crane staggered back. "What proof?" Tristan tore the envelope. Once, twice, again. Let the pieces fall like snow. "I see no proof, Lord Crane. I see a desperate man trying to destroy a lady's reputation because his own sins were exposed." The whispers erupted. The narrative shifted. Right there, before everyone's eyes. "Furthermore," Tristan continued, his voice edged with ducal authority, "I find it curious that you accuse others of hypocrisy when your own business dealings are currently under investigation by the House of Lords." "Something about textile contract fraud?" Crane's face went pale. "You didn't know." Tristan's smile was cold. "Then allow me to inform you. You have 3 days before formal charges are filed. I suggest you use that time wisely. Perhaps by leaving London for a while." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order disguised as advice. Crane looked around, at the watching faces, at the Duke who had just publicly annihilated him, at the shredded pieces of evidence scattered on the marble floor. He had lost. "Your Grace." He bowed stiffly, turned to Ivy. "Miss," and left, crossing the ballroom under the weight of whispers. Defeated. Tristan finally turned to Ivy. "Miss Winslow," he said formally, but there was warmth in his eyes. "Would you allow me to escort you to the terrace?" I believe we could both use some air. Ivy could barely speak. She only nodded. He offered his arm. She took it with trembling fingers. They walked through the murmuring crowd, and Ivy knew something fundamental had just changed. He had protected her, publicly. The question now was, what did it mean? The terrace was empty. London stretched below, flickering lights, dark streets, a city that never fully slept. The night air was cold against Ivy's warm skin. She could hear the distant music through the windows. A waltz, beautiful, distant, like another world. Tristan released her arm. He walked to the balustrade, his back to her, hands gripping the cold stone. I believe you already know something about me. It wasn't a question. Ivy's voice trembled. I asked to speak with you tonight because I wanted you to know I'm here to protect you, no matter what. How long have you known? Silence. Long. Heavy. Then Tristan laughed, a low, humorless sound. Suspected? Since the Kensington ball. Since I saw your eyes when everyone laughed. There was fury there. Sharp intelligence. The same look the veiled quill carries in her words. He turned, leaning back against the railing, finally meeting her eyes. But certainty, he continued. After our conversation about masks at Somerset House, the way you spoke of honesty being dangerous for women, that wasn't theory. That was lived experience. Ivy couldn't breathe. And then, his voice lowered, there were the little things. The way you chose words, how you observed everything, how your mind worked. Quick, sharp, always 3 steps ahead. A pause. The way you looked at me, truly looked. Not at the Duke, but at the broken man beneath Tristan. I hired an investigator. He confessed, his voice heavy. 4 weeks ago, he asked for 3 days to gather evidence. When the envelope arrived, I held it in my hands, sealed. Every answer inside. He looked up at the night sky. And I realized that if I opened it, if I read the confirmation, I'd have power over you. Knowledge you hadn't given me freely. So I burned it. Threw it into the fire without reading a word. Tears stung Ivy's eyes. Why? Because if you were the veiled quill, he met her gaze. I wanted you to tell me. Not because I was clever enough to find out, but because you trusted me with the truth. I wanted to, Ivy whispered. Every time, every conversation. But I was so afraid. Of what? Of me? Of losing you. Her voice broke. Because you were falling for the quiet girl. The one who never spoke. Not for the writer who ruined reputations. Not for the woman who used words as weapons. Ivy. He took a step forward, then another. He stopped so close she could see the darker flecks in his blue eyes. I fell in love with every part of you. The young lady who dropped that tray and was humiliated. The woman who reads political philosophy. And yes, he smiled. Small, devastating. The brilliant writer who speaks truths no one else dares to say. A tear rolled down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. And I realized, he continued, voice rough, that's what sets you apart from everyone else. You're real, intelligent, beautiful, perceptive. That's what fascinated me most. I love, Ivy whispered. I love you. All your parts, the walls, the scars, the man who cries over horses but hides his tears from the world. His eyes glistened, wet. Then we're the same, he said softly. Because I love the woman who's shy and brave, invisible and unforgettable, gentle and utterly relentless when injustice demands it. He cupped her face in both hands now. I love Ivy Winslow. And I love the veiled quill, because they're the same extraordinary person, Tristan. She grabbed his wrists, holding him, anchoring herself. I should have trusted you. I should have told you yes. His honesty was bare. You should have. And I should have asked. I should have made space where you could confess without fear. He rested his forehead against hers. We both built walls. But maybe we can tear them down. Together. Brick by brick. That terrifies me. It terrifies me too. He laughed quietly, his breath warm against her lips. But you know what scares me more? What? Living without you. spending the rest of my life wondering what it would have been like to love someone like you." The air between them disappeared. Ivy could feel his warmth, his scent, sandalwood, and something indefinable that was entirely him. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "Now?" His eyes dropped to her lips, then rose again. "Now we stop pretending. Stop hiding, and if society finds out about the veiled quill, then we face it together. Simple, final, as partners, as equals." She almost laughed. "You're a duke. I'm extraordinary," he interrupted. "Brilliant, brave, and mine. If you choose to be." Ivy's heart stopped. "Tristan, are you asking you to marry me?" He smiled, real, transformative. "Yes, not the traditional way. Not on one knee with rehearsed words, but honest, raw. You, me, no masks. People will say I'm a fortune hunter. Let them. They'll say you're mad. Probably am. They'll say I've ruined you. Ivy." He held her face firmly. "You didn't ruin me. You saved me. From an empty life, from a dead heart, from pretending to feel nothing forever." Tears streamed freely now. "I'm so afraid. So am I." He wiped her tears gently. "But I'd rather be afraid with you than safe alone." "And the veiled quill? What will we do about her? You decide. Want to stop writing? Your choice. Want to continue? We'll find a way. Maybe another pen name. Maybe sign your own name and dare the world to judge the Duchess with opinions." He smiled. "Or maybe I'll become your personal editor and we'll keep the secret to our graves. Everything's possible. But first, we'll need to improve your secret publishing methods. As you've seen, there are always risks of being discovered." Ivy laughed through tears, a wet, broken, happy sound. "Would you read my columns before I publish them? I'd read every word, a solemn promise, and disagree when necessary, debate with you, and love you through every sharp sentence and brilliant thought." She closed her eyes, feeling, believing, allowing herself, for the first time, to imagine life with this man, waking beside him, writing while he read, debating philosophy over tea, building something real, imperfect, honest. "Yes, I accept." She looked at him, at the man who saw her, all of her, and didn't run. "I'll marry you." The smile he gave transformed the entire night. He pulled her into his arms. He didn't kiss her, not yet, not with Mary watching, not without proper permission, but he held her as if she were a treasure, as if she were salvation, as if she were home, and Ivy held him back. Two broken people choosing to mend together, two hidden souls choosing to be seen, two voices, one silenced by trauma, the other concealed by necessity, finally choosing to speak freely. Inside, the waltz ended, applause echoed, but on the terrace beneath the London stars, two hearts finally found a shared rhythm. Not perfect, but real, and that, they discovered, was infinitely more valuable. Epilogue. When the music changes 6 months later. The library of the Winterbourne residence, now theirs, not just his, was bathed in golden late afternoon light. Ivy sat at the mahogany desk Tristan had commissioned, especially for her. Placed by the window, perfect light, a view of the gardens where roses bloomed in red and white cascades. The quill glided across the paper, black ink forming words, thoughts, truths, but not for the morning observer. The veiled quill had retired quietly after the Whitmore ball. Her final column was simple. There are moments when masks no longer serve, when a voice finds the courage to be heard without hiding, when truth no longer needs anonymity to be valid. This is that moment. Thank you all. And farewell. London had speculated for weeks, but no identity was ever revealed. Some mysteries, Ivy decided, deserved to remain untouched. Now she wrote under her own name. Essays, social analyses, published in a literary journal Tristan had helped found. One dedicated to women's voices on politics, philosophy, and justice. Still sharp, still honest. but now signed Lady Ivy Aldridge, Duchess of Winterbourne. And the world had to accept it, because apparently duchesses could have opinions. The door opened. She felt it before she saw it, that subtle change in the air that meant him. "Still writing?" Tristan asked, approaching from behind. "Almost finished." He kissed the top of her head, a casual gesture that still made her heart race. He read over her shoulder. "Educational reform for girls? About how society wastes half of its intelligence by keeping women silent." She tilted her head back, looking at him upside down. "Too controversial?" "Perfectly you." He smiled. "They'll hate it." "Good." He laughed, an open, easy sound that still surprised her. The man she'd met at the Kensington ball had rarely laughed, but this Tristan, the real one beneath all the layers, laughed often, especially with her. "There's something I want to show you," he said, extending his hand. Ivy took it. Let him guide her through the corridors to his private study, the place where she now wrote as well. But something was different. On his desk lay piles of cream-colored paper, not in secret drawers, not hidden, simply there, in plain daylight, and beside them, a carved mahogany box. "What?" Tristan opened it. Inside were hundreds of newspaper clippings, every column ever written by the veiled quill, organized chronologically, preserved with care. "You kept them?" Her voice faltered. "Every single one." He ran his fingers over the yellowed pages. 3 years of your voice, 3 years before I even knew it was you. And even then, I knew those words mattered. Tears burned her eyes, more easily lately. Everything made her cry these past weeks. The beauty of a sunset, the scent of roses in the garden, and now this. Why? Because these words, he picked one at random and read softly. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to speak even when silence would be safer." He looked at her. "That taught me to be brave. You taught me." Even before we met, Ivy touched the papers. Her story, her voice, preserved by him. Her hand instinctively went to her abdomen, a gesture she'd been making for days without realizing. Tristan noticed. Of course he noticed. He always noticed everything. "Ivy, are you—" His eyes widened. Hope, fear. "I'm not sure yet," she whispered. "But there are signs. Morning sickness, fatigue. Mary said I should wait another week to be certain, but..." She looked at him, at the man who'd once been taught that emotion was weakness, and she saw tears glisten in his blue eyes, the same blue eyes that had haunted her dreams almost a year ago. "A baby?" His voice broke on the word. "Ours? Maybe." She smiled through her tears. "I'm afraid to believe it. What if it's only in my mind? What if—" He silenced her with a kiss, gentle, reverent, a promise. When he pulled back, he held her face in both hands. "Then we'll wait together," he said softly. "And if it's true, if there's a child, I'll love them the way my father never loved me. I'll teach them that feeling is strength, not weakness, that tears are human, not shameful." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And if it's a girl," he continued, voice husky, "I'll teach her that her voice matters, that she doesn't need to hide to survive. Because she'll have a mother who once wrote truths when the world demanded her silence." Ivy sobbed, joy and fear and a love so immense it barely fit inside her chest. "And if it's a boy? I'll let him cry when he needs to. I'll protect his kindness, and I'll tell him about the brave woman who taught me that vulnerability is not weakness." He smiled through tears. "I'll tell him about you." She pulled him into her arms. He held her as if there were 3 of them now. Him, her, and the possibility of new life growing between them. "And now?" she asked against his chest. "What do I do with all this?" She gestured to the papers, to her old story. "Whatever you wish." He kissed the top of her head. "Keep them as memory. Burn them for release. Or," he smiled, "turn them into a book. Your choice. Always your choice." She looked at the desk, at the blank paper waiting. at the quill that no longer needed to hide. "I think," she whispered, "I'll write something new. Not about society, not about hypocrisy." She touched her abdomen again. About beginnings. About two broken people who chose to heal together. About how love doesn't fix everything, but makes imperfection bearable. Our story? Our story. And maybe, she smiled through joyful tears, the beginning of someone else's. Outside, the sun was setting over London, painting the sky in gold and rose, turning darkness into light. And inside, a writer who once lived in hiding finally found the courage to sign her own name. No longer the veiled quill, just Ivy Aldridge, wife, writer, and perhaps, in a few months, mother. All her parts, finally visible, finally free. And that, she realized as Tristan held her, and life, present and future, pulsed between them, was everything. It was rebirth, it was promise, it was love without masks, and it was worth every word she had never dared to say aloud. Until now.